Hi everybody, welcome to Grace Walk. I'm glad to have you connect with me here today as we're studying about grace. The Grace Walk is nothing less than a lifestyle that is animated by the divine life of Christ in us. It stands in stark contradiction to the kind of legalistic religious lifestyle that many of us lived. I know I grew up in church and it was all about dedicating yourself to try harder to do better. And boy, oh boy, did we ever give it the old college try. But it was back in 1990 that I came to the end of myself. I wrote a book called Grace Walk about that back then and came to the end of myself and I said, you know what? I give up. I'm tired of struggling. I'm tired of trying. I've been in church all my life. I've tried to do the things that please God, and no matter how hard I try or what I do, it doesn't seem to work. I give up. And I'm telling you, it was in that moment, it was as if I heard the voice of God say to me, good. I've been waiting for you to give up, because it's only when we give up and we stop struggling and trying that we're able to enter into His rest, to quote a biblical phrase. And when we enter into His rest, we find out that this life inside of Christ is so different from what we had believed. It's not a life where you struggle and rededicate yourself over and over and over again, but it's a life where you just simply accept His acceptance and live out the life that He has placed into you by virtue of His presence inside you. It's very liberating. So, when we understand this grace walk, it changes everything. It changes how we see God. It changes how we see ourselves. It changes how we see other people. It even changes the very foundation of our understanding in regard to faith. We've been talking about in this program for the last few weeks the cross of Jesus Christ. The cross, the crucifix, Calvary. That is the central place of the Christian faith. And the sad shame of it is that many people don't even understand what it's all about, because most folks have been wrongly taught and have come to believe that at the cross that God the Father punished God the Son by pouring out anger on Him so that He wouldn't have to pour out that anger on you and me. Now, if this is new to you, what I'm just saying, you might be thinking, well, what's wrong with that? Of course that's the way it is. No, that's not the way it is. Nobody is saying that Jesus did not die as a substitute for us on the cross. He did. Nobody is saying that Jesus wasn't punished on the cross. He was. But He wasn't punished by God the Father. He was punished by sin. Think of sin not like a crime that you commit that has to be judged, but think of sin more like a disease. In fact, the Bible speaks about the remission of sins. Same word we would use for cancer or other diseases. Think of sin like a disease that needed to be cured. Jesus took the disease of humanity, sin, into Himself, and on the cross He paid the ultimate price when He experienced death that was doled out upon Him, not by God the Father, but by sin. But in the church world, a lot of people have the idea that God is angry and that He's so just, that He had to pour out His anger on Jesus because, He's a just God, and so God pours out all this anger on Jesus Christ on the cross, and that's what the cross is about. No. We've been looking together in the last studies at some of the types in the Old Testament that point toward the cross. Some of the Old Testament foreshadowing of the cross. We talked about the Passover lamb. We talked about the scapegoat. We talked about an ephah of fine flour being a sin offering. And in each instance, as we looked at those Old Testament sacrifices, we saw that there was no anger involved when those sacrifices were made. I mean, when the father of the Jewish household killed the Passover lamb, he wasn't angry with the lamb. When the priest laid his hand on the scapegoat to carry the sins of the people away into the wilderness, he wasn't angry. For goodness sake, when they were told you can bring a basket full of flour, nobody was mad at the flour when they brought it as a sacrifice. And each of those sacrifices are a picture of Jesus and His sacrifice. So we see then in those sacrifices the evidence that God the Father was not angry toward Jesus. What I'm trying to do here in this program is help you get past the contamination and pollution that was put into you growing up, and me too, that had led us to believe that God the Father is angry, that He's always edgy and in this bad mood, because after all, people keep messing up and they keep sinning, and so God's always on edge, and you better be glad for Jesus, because Jesus is the one that stands between you and His Father to keep His Father from coming after you with a vengeance. No. Don't you know, Jesus and His Father are just alike. They are the same. The Father's never been after you with revenge. He's always loved you. And this whole thing of sacrifice, we need to understand it in a right way, because the way that we've seen it in the past is a troubling tradition. If, as much traditional Western world teaching has suggested, Jesus had to die to satisfy God's justice, then some troubling questions remain. Now think about it. If Jesus had to die so that God's justice could be satisfied, I want you to answer these questions. Think for yourself and answer these questions. First, how can it be said that the Father forgave me, in the way the word is commonly used, for a debt I owed Him if the debt was actually paid? I mean, we say all the time, God forgave my debt. Now wait a minute. Let's think about what we're saying here. If you owed me $1,000 and a generous friend of yours paid me what you owed me, how would you respond if I came to you and said, hey, don't worry about what you owe me, I've forgiven the debt? You get it? Your response would likely be to tell me in no uncertain terms, I hadn't forgiven anything, but that the debt had been paid on your behalf. So if you say, well, God forgave me the debt I owe because of my sin, because Jesus paid it back to God, how is that forgiving my debt? Somebody paid it. Second, even if somebody wrongly insists on using a judicial understanding of justice to interpret the cross, how would that scenario even make sense? Would justice be served if a judge punished an innocent person in the place of the guilty person? If somebody murdered my loved one and a legal ruling ordered the murderer's child to be put to death, would that serve justice? No, it would not. We've just got it all scrambled and upside down in our heads because of the convoluted logic of legalistic religion. That's not what happened, and that's not what forgiveness is all about. Never has been. That's not what it's about. We're going to say more about that and the meaning of forgiveness when we come back right after this. So then God's forgiveness toward us is not what some of us have been told. It's not that God forgave your debt because Jesus paid it. Again, if you owed me $1,000 and somebody else paid me, how could I say I forgave you your debt? It was paid. It's not like we believed at all. It's not like, okay, well, I did wrong and somebody else was punished in my place and they took the punishment. How's that fair? If I murdered your child and somebody else got punished instead of me, how's that fair? That's not the way it works. We've got it all messed up, what justice is and what forgiveness is. Consider the word forgiveness. Have we been forgiven by God the Father? Yes. But the word doesn't have to have this kind of courtroom judicial meaning that we often think about when we hear it. The word can also mean to take away. In the Hebrew language in the Old Testament, that's the language of the Old Testament. The most commonly word that's translated as forgiveness or forgive is the word nasa. If you were to take the Hebrew letters and convert it into English, it would be N-A-S-A, nasa. Looks like NASA. It means to pick something up and carry it away. I like that, NASA, here in the States. Houston, we have liftoff. I mean, that's what happened to our sin. It was lifted off, nasa. One example of where the word is used is in Psalm 32:1, where the Bible says, "Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered." The word used there is the word nasa. It's translated as forgive 8 times in the Bible, but it can also be translated in other ways. For instance, when Nehemiah was about to go into the king's presence, the Bible said he nassawed the wine, and he gave it to the king. When God reminded Israel of His faithfulness, He said to them, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I nassau. I bore you up on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. That's in Exodus 19. When Jonah found himself in the boat with all the others and they were about to die in the storm because of his sin, he said, pick me up, nassau me, pick me up, throw me into the sea. The list could go on and on because the word is used 611 times in the Old Testament. So the forgiving doesn't mean some kind of courtroom thing where the judge says, okay, I'll hold you not guilty, even though you're guilty, No, that's not what it means. The word nassau in the Old Testament means to take it away. What about the New Testament? Well, there are 2 words in the original language of the New Testament that are translated forgive. The first one is a word that means to send or make go away. The word is used in John 2:12, where John said, I am writing to you, little children, because your sins have been forgiven you for His name's sake. John was saying that through the cross, sins have been taken away, and the fact is, the tense of the verb even indicates that the result will be an abiding, ongoing reality. It's a forgiveness that shows our sins have been forever sent away. It's not about an angry God deciding to get over it and move past His anger about our sin. The other word used in the New Testament that's translated forgive, it's the word charizomai. The root of it is charis, which means grace. It's used 19 times in the New Testament, and it denotes the action of doing something pleasant or gracious or benevolent towards somebody else. It's absolutely true that the death of Jesus was the source of our forgiveness of sin, but I hope you see now that the crucifixion was not a place where the anger of the Father was poured out on Jesus in order to satisfy some kind of justice that demanded payback. Neither is His forgiveness exoneration for crimes we committed. Divine forgiveness is the gracious act of taking our sins away from us and never associating with them with us again. So, if the Father didn't punish Jesus on the cross, does that mean there's no punishment for sin? Again, no, it doesn't mean that at all. There is indeed punishment for sin, but it doesn't come from pure love. Sin brings its own punishment. It is sin that brings punishment. You know, I was talking to my friend Blake one day. He said to me, so you're saying Jesus didn't take the punishment for our sin on the cross? I said, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. Jesus did take our place on the cross, and He certainly was punished, but it wasn't His Father that punished Him. So he said, well, then who did punish Him if it wasn't His Father? I said, look, man, the reason you're frustrated about this is your insistence on framing your question inside this faulty idea that sin is a crime that needs to be punished by God, as if He saw us through the lens of some sort of cosmic courtroom judge. Well, over a period of weeks, we talked together about it, and finally one day he said to me, he said, I get it. He said, I've always viewed God as holy in the sense that He had to punish sin in some way. The fact is, though, He doesn't look at us that way. But instead, He sees us as a Father who had to deal with our sin or it would destroy us. It was a great joy for me to see my friend come to understand forgiveness that way. Since Adam sinned and hid himself in the Garden of Eden, people have had this mistaken idea that God was coming to exact revenge on them for their wrongdoing. But when you begin to see your Father through the eyes of grace, you understand that what happened at the cross wasn't a courtroom scene. It was a scene in which Jesus sacrificed Himself for us by taking our deadly sin into Himself so that we could be healed from its deadly effect. I mean, Paul did write in Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. But it's not God who executes a death sentence on those that sin. Sin does it. Remember, God didn't tell Adam that he would kill him if he ate from the forbidden tree. He told him that in the day he ate from that tree, he would surely die, but it would be sin that caused him to die, not his creator. Not his creator. So sin does bring punishment, but it's not God who punishes. So now, let me tell you, you've messed up. You've done some bad things. We all have. And you've got this idea in your mind, oh, no wonder things will never go right for me. Look at all I've done wrong. God's going to be out to get me. It's payday someday, and today's the day. I'm going to ask you to shake that. I'm going to ask you to get past that, because God is not angry toward you, and He's not angry about your sin. If somebody got cancer from smoking cigarettes, would you be angry or hate the person that had the cancer? Even if they caused it, you're going to have compassion for the person you love. And that's exactly the way your Creator is toward you when it comes to the matter of sin. He's not out to get you. He's out to help you. Now, people raise questions about things like propitiation and other issues, and let's talk some more about that. But first, let's hear this special word. We're so preoccupied with the subject of sin in the church world. If we were half as occupied with Christ as we are with sin, we'd be a different group of people, I can tell you that. But when it comes to this matter of sin, we've misunderstood the way that it has been dealt with. It's not been dealt with by a God who has been angry toward us because we've fouled up, because we've gone astray. He's never been angry. Jesus came into the world, Christ incarnate in the person of Jesus the man, lived a sinlessly perfect life, and He went to the cross, and on the cross He took this fatal disease called sin into Himself, and there He was punished not by God, but by sin. Now, somebody's been to seminary. Somebody's been to Bible college. Somebody's got a book they've read, and they're going to say, well, wait a minute. What about the whole idea of propitiation? My friend Blake that I had talked to, who was struggling with it, that was one of the issues he had to deal with. He said, but what about the subject of propitiation? I mean, it's not a word we use every day, but it is a term that's you're going to find when you do any study of the atonement of Christ. In Romans 3:25, Jesus is referred to as the one whom God displayed publicly as a propitiation in His blood through faith. The word has often been used to denote an appeasement for sin in a punitive sense. An appeasement. The Greek lexicon defines the word as, and I quote, relating to an appeasing or expiating, having placating or expiating force, expiatory, a means of appeasing or expiating. So in other words, it's like it calms God down is the way you can see it. It appeases Him. But there's another way to see the word propitiation. The Greek lexicon also further defines it as, listen to this, used of the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies, which was sprinkled with the blood of the expiatory victim on the annual Day of Atonement. Now, listen up. Here's where you can interpret the Bible in a way that's consistent with the whole God is love truth, being our point of origin in discovering its meaning. Note that this aspect of its meaning, being a place, refers to the mercy seat that covered the Ark of the Covenant. It was on that mercy seat that the blood of sacrificial animals was poured out, and the efficacy of the blood poured out there brought the remission of sins for another year. So, the word propitiation then is used not only to refer to expiation in a judicial sense, the way we've always wanted to hold on to, but also to refer to a place, the place where sin was dealt with by the blood of a sacrifice. You know, the Septuagint is a translation where the Old Testament scriptures written in Hebrew were translated into Greek. When the translators came to that Hebrew word, mercy seat, kapareth, they chose to use a Greek word called helasterion, which translates to propitiation, as its equivalent. Now get what I'm saying. When they came in the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures to the word mercy seat, they, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, translated it as propitiation. So they obviously held the view that propitiation had more to do with the remedial aspect of the sacrifice of sin than it did for any kind of retribution, exploding out of an angry father on his son. In other words, they saw the propitiation more as a cure than a curse. It was the place where sin was dealt with. What they're showing is that the cross was the new covenant substance foreshadowed through the old covenant shadow of the mercy seat. The cross was no more a place where God poured out anger on Jesus than the mercy seat was a place where the Old Testament high priest poured out anger on a lamb. Propitiation was remedial, not retributive. It was to cure, not to curse. The cross was a place of divine love, not divine anger. The only anger there was that day was the anger of sinful humanity unleashed on pure love in the person of Jesus. But you know, another interesting aspect of the word hilasterion, propitiation, is that it shares the same family history as the word hilaros. Listen to this. Think of that word. Think of the word hilarious. Obviously, I'm not suggesting there was anything funny about the crucifixion of Jesus, but I do believe there's a basis for suggesting that in the midst of the pain, it was a place of divine joy, not rage. The cross of Jesus Christ is the most pure expression of love that has ever or will ever exist. In that place of propitiation, pure agape submitted himself to the ferocity of sinful humanity, while at the same time absorbing our sin into his own body and soul so that we would be delivered from its consequence. I hope you believe this. This is the gospel. And this is as good a place to end today as I know of. Here it is. Once again, your God is not angry with you. He never has been. The cross proves that. If He died for you while sin still stubbornly held on to you and we held on to sin, you can be assured that He loves us now. Religion has smeared His face with mud from the garden of guilt after the fall of man, but that false image doesn't negate the reality of who He is. God is love. He always has been, and He always will be. So I want to encourage you to turn your face and your attention away from the shortcomings that you have perceived in yourself. Turn away from what you have seen as sin and failure, and stare into the face of a loving God who accepts you and receives you just like you are right now. And I promise you, on the authority of Christ Himself, you'll find healing and you'll be made whole. Well, thanks for being with me today on Grace Walk. I'd love to have you connect with me on the internet. Come over to stevemcveigh.com. You can find out there about a group I meet with online live every day and other ways that we can connect. Until next time, be blessed as you go forward in your own grace walk.